Our friends, welcome to the channel, Bob here, and I thought I would just finish off the week with a video. This is just a little follow-up to the Pantheon video that I did. And there was quite a lot of good discussion there, so I thought I would just cover some points that you guys brought up, and just all my opinion again. I think ultimately all we can do is wait and see. I know it sounds obvious, because we're never all going to agree on exactly what we thought the game was going to be, or what we were hoping for. What we want now, that might be different. You also have to take into account the fact that you just get, on every side, just the internet, you get people who are just stubbornly headed and they only listen to what they want to listen to. It's only because I'm just reading a comment from someone who basically repeated what I said in the build, what I said in the video about the build and what it was aimed at, and the fact that things will change, and then kind of made it sound like I didn't say that. And I think that's just people who just kind of want to they just want to feel like they're more informed than you. So they kind of listen to a video or read an article and they pick out the bits that they don't like, and then they respond to that. But quite often what you'll find is that they'll repeat what you said, but they make it sound like you didn't say that, so you're in the wrong, and they drop bombs, like they drop facts like bombs, as though they've got any idea about what they're talking about, when they really haven't. I think because of those reasons, all we can do is wait and see. But you guys did bring up some interesting points. And what I also did is I went back and I watched a couple of interviews by Brad McQuaid and picked up a couple of points about what he said as well. But starting off with some of the things that you guys brought up first. I think first of all, one of the most interesting things is nostalgia. A few of you mentioned about, classic EQ or P99 is really just nostalgia, but actually to me it's not. Now, I did start playing P99, or Project 1999 is an EverQuest emulator server if you're not aware, and it kind of sticks to what they call the classic era, so vanilla up until the end of Elias. So I definitely did start playing on P99 for the nostalgia, but that's not what keeps me there sort of like 7 or 8 years later. What keeps me there now is the fact that there isn't, for me personally, maybe you think, well, Classic provided it, maybe you think Ultra Online provided it, maybe you think Asheron's Call does, maybe you think there's a more modern MMO that provides this, but Classic EverQuest or P99, nothing compares even remotely close, in my opinion, to the combat mechanics and the emergent gameplay that you get in the combat. Like nothing. When I think of classes like the Enchanter or the Bard, or even the Shaman, like the Shadow Knight Necromancer, I can't think of another MMO where I can log in and have a similar experience that, particularly like things like the Enchanter, like going through a dungeon as an Enchanter, or a Bard, or even a Necromancer to a certain extent if there's a lot of undead. I can't think of anything that allows me to feel I have so much control over my gameplay experience, and just the sheer amount of ability, the sheer amount of ways that I can approach an encounter in comparison to other games, but also have that danger. So I don't, if I go into a dungeon and it's around my kind of levelish, what you would expect to go into a dungeon at any given level, you've still got that danger, like literally one resisted spell and you're dead. But at the same time, nothing gives that mechanical, those gameplay mechanics when you approach an encounter, to pull mobs, the tactics involved in what you're doing. It's interesting. Someone said that, I can quote here. Let's have a quick look. Talking about like character progression, gameplay mechanics. It says Pantheon is different for sure, but it sticks with the EverQuest formula. It doesn't at all. Not being able to use lower level spells is a huge thing, which doesn't stick to the EverQuest formula at all. Not classic anyway. That's what I'm comparing it to. And all these passive abilities and stuff that have different effects. It doesn't stick to it at all. I understand that will give players more options to diversify their builds, and that's not a bad thing. But that's not EverQuest, not classic EverQuest. So yeah, I can't see the comparison there. But no, as I said, I did go to P99 for nostalgia, but that's not what keeps me there. Out of all the MMOs that I still play and played recently, and have played in the last sort of 21, 22 years, nothing comes close to that experience. The only other game I've ever played that comes close to it, but from a different experience, was playing as like a bard or a tamer in Ultima Online. That gave me that gave me a similar feeling of depth to the combat, whereas pretty much everything else, playing like World of Warcraft Classic and going in dungeons and stuff, it didn't feel anywhere near as tactical as the options that EverQuest gave you. So that's why I stay. I went for the nostalgia, but I stay for the gameplay and the mechanics. I think the other thing we come on to, I guess, probably is the vision, really, and how we interpreted that, and that's really interesting. A lot of you have said that. Let's say a lot of you. Some of you said that you were expecting classic EverQuest with some revamps. I don't think when you say you were expecting classic EverQuest with some revamps or some more modernisation. People seem to think that you were just expecting P99 with new graphics. Like that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting gameplay and mechanics similar to P99, which it doesn't look like really to me like that's what we're going to get. The combat looks like it will be similar in a sense that a group taking on a mob. The mob will be tough. It's got a lot of hit points, but there's a difference between a mob being like a meat shield and it takes a long time to kill, and those encounter tactics that, as I said, like a necro or an enchanter or a bard or whatever gives you. I guess the thing is that we don't know too much about the classes at the moment, so maybe the enchanter, necro, bard, whatever will give you that. Will give you those options, but I just feel that with all of the way that they're designing the character progression, I don't feel that we're going to get that experience. So that's the other thing, like the interpretation of the vision. I don't think that when someone says I was hoping for it to be like P99, I don't necessarily mean that it's got to be exactly like that with reskinned graphics. I think there are certain things that we'd all hope to be modernised, but this goes way beyond that. This goes way beyond just a reskin P99. It goes way beyond expecting it to be fairly close to P99, but with some modernisations. This seems to be turning out to be quite different to that. But that's just, again, that's just my opinion. But getting back onto the perception of development is interesting. Listening to Brad, and in hindsight, listening to him again talking, and these were interviews from one was 6 years ago and one was a few years ago as well. Is that I think they kept it all. I think it was all quite misty. It was all a bit foggy, and I think that's shown in the fact that a lot of you seem to have different perceptions on what you were going to be getting. That's an issue. Like what there was an interview with Brad where he was talking about corpse recovery. He didn't really commit to anything. He said he wanted it to be punishing. He wanted it to be to have an impact, but not as punishing as it was. Well, I think the problem with those kind of things, and I think it was mentioned in a comment, is that the reason it was punishing and the reason it had such an impact on you was because of exactly how it was. When you start changing it and watering it down, it doesn't become that anymore. And the current death penalty seems to be you'll keep all of your equipment that you're wearing, but you might not keep your coinage or all the items that you were carrying. And once you start watering it down, players being players, I mean, I can think of 101 ways of just circumventing that, so I won't care about the death penalty. If I'm in a dungeon and you get to a boss and you loot something really nice and you die and it stays on your corpse, well, obviously then you'd have to go through the process. But I would just, if that item was better than what I had, I would just put that item on immediately. And if the item that I was replacing wasn't particularly valuable, I would just leave it, essentially. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like you're going to lose experience. Maybe you are, I'm not sure. That may be something that you'd go back for, or you'd get a resurrection for. But yeah, I think the thing is as well, with regards to things that we think that we don't want anymore. It's a classic, like it's a thingy wow classic thing. I remember when a developer said a few years ago, you think you want EverQuest, you think you want WoW Classic, but really you don't. And it turns out that a lot of people did. And a lot of people seem to still do. I don't think it's probably doing as well as it was. I imagine it's a bit like Green Server at the moment, where people were going back when when a new patch came out to experience new content and whatnot. A new WoW, like a full fat WoW has had a new expansion released recently, which I think people like. So a lot of people are probably playing that, but some of those players will go back to Classic at some point. And I think that, yeah, I think it's that thing where, yeah, people say you think you want it, but you don't. But actually, people did. Yeah, but the whole how we've perceived how the game was going to be. Yeah, it's we've all many of us have all got our own takes, unsurprisingly, and for some people it hasn't turned out how we was expecting it to be. But I think the thing is that with the corpse recovery, I think you either kind of go with it because it was that made the game, made that experience what it was, or you just remove it because it will just be something that people will circumvent, or the people that don't like it at all will just find it annoying. So you kind of get this middle ground where no one likes it, or people just find ways of getting around it because it's not as as extreme as it as it once was. I think let's have a look at some of the other points. I think the other thing that I find quite interesting is not what gamers want in 2021. And that might be the case. It's making your game more like World of Warcraft. Maybe that is a way to go. And I obviously understand the financial benefits of. It's funny how people kind of will say, well, obviously they're doing that because they want as many people. They want it to be financially viable. Well, obviously, people say things sometimes that are so obvious. But it's said with a large dollop of superiority, as though they're saying something that you haven't thought of. Of course, that's the case, but it goes back to the perception of the Kickstarter and how you've perceived what the devs have said. It's and the thing is, like back at I remember back at Kickstarter and even listening to the interviews, it was quite foggy, but there were hints that they were going for that. EverQuest Classic kind of difficulty with some slight quality of life changes. So I can see why people did perceive it that way. But as far as like it's not what people want, I guess it's not. I mean, I looking at the feedback, going back to Kickstarter and in the early development phases, it seemed as though there were a lot of people who wanted that experience. So I do find it confusing. I wonder if there's anyone who back then thought to themselves, this is like P99 EQ, but with some modernisation. I'm all in. That's I'm fed up with all these MMOs that are currently out. That's what I want. And as development's gone on and things have appeared to change. Because we're seeing more, I wonder if those people's opinions have then changed as to what they want, because it's what the devs want. I don't know, But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately with that, it always seemed to me from the feedback that I was seeing on streams like chat and stuff that's what people wanted. But I guess at this point, yeah, it's been decided that that hasn't actually yet isn't what we wanted. We want some things from EQ, but we want most things to have been, to be quite frank, simplified, modernised. So then you end up with something that is ultimately just what we pretty much more of what we've got at the moment. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. One of the other things that I find interesting is that Brad does talk about things that people will find really annoying, and I'm not sure that they will ever get into it. So that's where the fogginess comes with regards to how we perceived Kickstarter and those early moments, those early days. He talked about localized auctions. So if you were talking to, like, if you were auctioning something, only it wouldn't be a zone-wide thing. It would only be people who were in a certain distance of you would hear you auctioning. He said that that's how EverQuest was originally supposed to be, but they didn't. Get it in for whatever reason, technical reasons, I would assume. And he was talking about auctions. He really wanted auctions in Pantheon to be like that. Well, that seems like something along the lines of corpse recoveries, really. I can't imagine that's what modern MMO players want. It sounds great on paper, like the corpse recovery does when you talk about it, before you think of the logistics of it. Yeah, but I can't imagine most players going for that, where they've got to go to a zone and actually stand near someone to hear what they're selling. No, I can't see that. I can't see that being something. So, being something that someone looking for a more modern MMO would want. So there was definitely some fogginess and some confusion over the development, and you can only over what the game was going to be. You can only blame the developers for that. I think ultimately, whatever perceptions we've got them because of what we heard. Obviously, we project onto that what we want or what we want to hear. But it's but I think the early Kickstarter was a bit foggy. It didn't really swing one way or the other, hedging its bets, I guess, which that's probably the thing. Another thing about talking about going back to kind of talking about things that we think that we don't think players want. I think things like corpse recovery is an obvious one. Like the amount of time it takes sitting around to get your health or your mana back, I can only assume that I'm not sure if there's anything firm on that, but I assume that's going to be different. Someone was talking about questing. And we're talking about the perception system. It's interesting. Like on thinking about it, perception system doesn't seem unique or as original as it once did. I'm thinking about Dungeons and Dragons Online here. DDO has a similar system where you get messages about the environment as you move around dungeons, and you even get some of that voiced. You even get like a DM voice of a DM talking to you as you proceed around the dungeon about stuff that's going on. So yeah, I mean, the perception system is a flash word for a questing system, really. I kind of get the thing though that they called it that because they didn't want people to think it was just going to be a WoW quest thing, but I would imagine that's kind of what it will end up being. Talking about questing, there's also someone also mentioned about the fact they don't know this obviously because they haven't played the game, I'm assuming. Otherwise, if they had, they're breaking NDA. But someone seemed convinced that the questing and stuff when the game comes out, the dialogue options will be optional. But that also creates a problem, because you will get people. Also, going back to talking about what people want, one of the other perceptions that people seem to have is that because there's only X amount of people playing P99, they're the only people who want to play P99 type game. That's not the case. I get people all the time on video saying, "I've just found P99, didn't know wasn't aware of it," So I don't think that's the case. You know, I think the people currently playing EverQuest Live and P99 and whatever hardcore MMO emulator they're playing, I don't think it necessarily tells you what the the population or the subscription base could be for a game like P99. But certainly, obviously, it's going to be a lot less than a game that's more like WoW. Yeah, but like the questing thing is interesting. Like, if you do have these quest and lore type things within dungeons, you're going to get a conflict of interest, you know, because there are people who, like someone was saying, which I completely disagree with. Someone was saying that EverQuest players are the ones who search out every NPC in a bar and talk to them and whatnot. Well, actually, in my experience playing P99, they're not. You know, most people, I think, play P99 for the combat, for the dungeon crawling, for the interaction with other players, for the auctioning, for those kind of things. There are people like myself who will hail people in a bar, but they're not the majority in my experience. Maybe you've found otherwise. But I would say that many people that like EverQuest, you know, it's that dungeon crawling, grinding experience that they like. Yeah, and I think I probably covered most of what I was going to talk about. But I'm not sure about this. You know, you think this kind of thing where you kind of, you know, you think it's what you want, but actually people don't want that. I mean, my whole thing with EverQuest, with Pantheon, was that they were kind of going back to that because it seemed there were a lot of people who were fed up with WoW type games, and they wanted to they wanted something else. You know, they wanted to go back to that how it was, and I guess maybe what they meant was they wanted to go back to that, but there were things that. But I guess what we mean is when we say these things is that we want to go back to P99, but I don't want this because I didn't like it, or I don't want that because I didn't like it. I guess that's really what we're talking about. Yeah, and I guess it'd be interesting ultimately to see what they come up with. You know, can they merge? Can they take P99? So, for example, the combat, you know, the complexities of the combat and the strategy of the combat and the difficulty of the combat. Can they take that and marry it with like a tradition, you know, like a more modern MMO questing system, etc. I'm not sure. We'll find out. I guess what doing the videos and listening to your comments and listening to Brad and whatnot is that it's made me reevaluate how I'm looking at the game, and I'm now not looking at the game as a successor to EverQuest in any way, because no matter what I've read from you guys or what I've listened from the devs and stuff and whatnot, no matter how many people, no matter someone who makes comments as though they're playing the game and they know, because all these things will change as well. So what a developer's telling you now might change in a year's time. You know, this game, I would probably say overall doesn't look like an EverQuest spiritual successor in any form. The combat does, in the sense that mobs are taking longer to kill. Yeah, but other than that, I'm not really seeing it. And I think ultimately, from a combat point of view, the fact that you've got all these different underlying systems, like modern systems, with regards to passives, and depending on what state your character is in and what health state they're in, and blah blah blah. I'm not expecting the combat to be as pure, maybe as basic. You know, maybe you see it as being basic. Yeah. I'm not, and the fact that they're making these new decisions, the fact that they're kind of seem to be changing things incrementally, like recently saying that you can't use lower level spells, like you have to use the upgraded one or the new one. That takes away a lot of the strategy, you know. When people on enchanters, for example, worked out they're better off just using the level 4 mez generally. You know, you won't be able to do that here. You won't be able to use your low level root, I'm assuming. You'll have to use a the next one in the progression. You know, that will be a shame. I'm all for like them showing off like an enchanter or a necro or bard or whatever it may be, doing some crazy stuff that you can do on P99. I'm up for that. Please, please, please let's see that. But I'm not 100% convinced that. I think the problem is that I think the worst thing the game could do, in my opinion, is be a halfway house. So for example, you have a corpse run, but you water it down to a point where players will just players will just find ways of circumventing it until it's not really a problem. Either it's a corpse run with meaning, or it's not. You know, I think trying to do all these things, trying to appease everyone, I think is not the way to go. So I would personally have a P99 style corpse run, or just don't have one at all, because I just don't think taking an old system and watering it down really works personally. And same with the combat as well. I'm not sure what classes I'll be playing at the moment. And one thing I was going to mention that I nearly forgot was that, like watching my video, people watching the previous video, you may have thought that I was disappointed because I wanted P99 reskinned, and like I kind of do. But for someone who kind of plays solo, like when Pantheon was first announced, I thought to myself, when I play Pantheon, I'll be trying to get in a guild, maybe a new guild, meet some new people, do some new things, or if you guys join the same server and we do a guild, that'd be great. But because of how I play EverQuest now, I was playing it on P99. I was kind of disappointed with the early release, because I thought to myself, well, for me it's going to be like P99, where because I play solo, I'm going to have to probably look at a class that's fairly good at soloing. There's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm not going to be able to do because I play on my own, like there is on P99. So I was kind of disappointed, really. So the disappointment I expressed in the video about it not being like as much like P99 as I was hoping was not necessarily like a selfish one, with regards to that's what I wanted. Because for me it would be easier for me if the game was a bit less punishing, and maybe I can find a class where I can do more on my own if I need to. It was more the fact that how I perceived the way the devs were talking, so what I was expecting from the game. That's where the disappointment was. And I admit I am somewhat disappointed that it's not going to be more like P99, because I'm still playing P99 and I enjoy it. But for me, I guess ultimately the watering, I'm going to say dumbing down, the watering down of some of the more hardcore elements of P99, goes in my favour as someone who plays as they do. But my disappointment was more, I think, how I perceived what their vision was essentially. But anyway, that's enough of that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting on the video. Apart from the one or two of you who put stuff up that I've already said and try and make it sound like you actually know what you're talking about when no one really knows at the moment. Who knows what will change before now and release. Yeah, but for everyone else, thanks for the comments. It's pretty awesome. A lot of good chat. I'm not sure if this video clears things up for you. And it doesn't need to. Who cares, right? We're all in it for our own enjoyment, and we'll either play it because we enjoy it or not. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon.